The Thesaurus Chapter House is the world's first headquarters for Christian ministerial innovation, bringing preachers, leaders, and innovators together to collaborate on new liturgies, resources, and responses to the challenge of our times. This podcast explores the ever-changing era of perpetual upheaval, in which effective ministry requires constant imagination, creativity, and change. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on the Chapter House podcast. And I'm joined by two good friends of mine, very good friends of mine, who just met each other about 5 minutes ago. So here I have my friends Robin Smith and Simone Searcy. So why don't you say hey and tell everybody kind of what you do and where you're from.
Hi, everybody. Simone Searcy here. I'm a performance artist, but right now I am working at Jackson Interfaith Shelter, which is a homeless shelter.
Right on.
Awesome. I'm Robin Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Refuge for Women in Las Vegas, and we run a long-term residential program for women who are coming out of the sex industry.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. Well, the Chapter House podcast really focuses on innovation in Christian ministry, and today I thought we might talk about human trafficking and particularly ending human trafficking or responding to human trafficking, because that's its own kind of missiological innovation. Once upon a time, the church was really focused on evangelism. I mean, the Big C Church, the historical church, and then of course the efforts of the church expanded to include food, education, shelter, but sex trafficking is now an even bigger leap, an even bigger and more ambitious offering of the church to try and get involved to rescue women, to help women. So tell me about that. Tell me why it's important. Tell me what it does and why it matters.
Yeah. As far as what we do, why it matters is because a lot of people want to do rescue. That's like on our hearts all the time.
What is rescue like?
So rescue is like finding a woman who needs or who is wanting to get out of sex trafficking or out of the industry, and they don't have a way to do that. They don't have the resources. They don't have the means. They don't have a place to go. So rescue are the people on the front line who help them get out. But then the problem is there's nowhere for them to go.
Well, hey, but before you go any further, because this I didn't totally understand this. When I originally thought about human trafficking and people like yourself on the front lines of responding to human trafficking, I thought that you'd put up a sandwich board or something and said if you're done being a stripper or a prostitute or whatever, come talk to us and we'll help you find a job. But there's a whole lot more to it, right? I mean, there's some kind of entrapment or like coercion. I mean, they just, it's not that they don't want to leave, always is that they can't.
Right, exactly. Women who are involved in the sex industry, the trauma runs so deep. So it's not just as simple as waking up one day and deciding, I don't want to do this anymore, and then they can change their life. Like, it's not that easy. So that's where, like with Refuge for Women, we recognize that it's a long-term process. And so we do long-term. We don't do rescue. We don't do emergency. Well, we're just starting to do emergency shelter, but our end game, our goal is to get the women into long-term residential care, because trauma takes a long time to deal with. And so if they're really, truly going to be restored and get their life back, it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen in 2 days.
Yeah, right. And,
yeah.
Because of an altar call or something.
Right, right.
Not discounting the supernatural power of God, just saying that based on statistics, the supernatural power of God doesn't tend to rescue people immediately. Sometimes, just not often. No. So here's a question I have, because I think maybe, like many people, I've over the years made a lot of assumptions, most of which turned out to be wrong. So I might screw up the language and screw up the approach. But when you say the trauma takes a long time to sort of unprogram or reprogram, you mean, do you mean rather things like you get them into a place where they're safe, you get them a job, but because their hurts run so deep, they end up going back to their old habits and patterns, even though they have the support network?
Yep, absolutely. So the average woman who's coming out of the sex industry takes 7 attempts before they come out and stay out because of that exact thing. The trauma, the draw, the brainwashing, whatever, is so strong. So I'll just give you a great example of that. One of our residents, this was about 3 years ago, it was graduation day. So she'd been in our home for 9 months and gone through the program, done really, really well. Graduation day, she's standing there in her cap and gown, and she started to cry. And I looked at her and I said, are those happy tears? Because this is a joyful day. Like, let's be celebrating. And she said, yeah, they're happy tears because I'm graduating, but I'm also really sad because today I really miss Asian Mike, and that was the name of her pimp. And it's like 9 months later, the draw is so strong. Like it's not that healing happens, but it doesn't happen at the drop of a hat.
And is it like Stockholm syndrome? I mean, like where they're drawn to people who hurt them, or is it like just that they genuinely love these people? They have a healthy community with them, even though the circumstances are really unhealthy.
Certainly not healthy at all. I mean, it actually has a name called the trauma bond, and it is this very unhealthy bond that is formed through a traumatic experience. So it's somewhat like Stockholm, but I mean, it's actually like really hard to even fathom it, because the person who causes you the most harm is the person that you're the most loyal to. And so, I mean, and a lot of it is through whatever form the trafficker used to get them to be reliant on him. That's what the bond is formed around. So,
oh my gosh. I totally get that though. Like I can imagine, because there's even times right now where I'm in a good, healthy space and things like that. But every now and then, maybe like in the middle of the night or something like that, I can't sleep, and I wonder, oh, if so and so could see me now, or something like that, or if I was this strong or this wise, then would the relationship have been different? And so I completely that's how I can.
You mean like
get
other people in your past that have hurt you? Like you go, if jerk face Bob could see me now, then he wouldn't have hurt me like that.
Yeah, I would have been stronger in the relationship. Maybe the relationship wouldn't have failed. It would have went different. It would have went my way. I would have been the stronger person in the relationship. Maybe I would have left them instead of them leaving me, or it wouldn't have been as traumatic of a breakup, or just something like that. Like I would have had more control of it. I totally get that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're pointing your finger like she was nailing the.
No, that comment that you made about like, oh, if I would have blank, then maybe this would have turned out differently. Yeah, right. I mean, like we, 5 degree or removed from that or whatever, look at it and say, yeah, like that's nuts. Like that's not the way it works. But when you're in it, you don't see it that way. And that's the bond. That's the brain, the way the brain thinks, that is so hard to break, that thought process for women, because they do feel like this sense of like, I did this, I caused this, this is my fault, or I could have done this differently.
I wasn't good enough.
Yeah. If only I would have. Yeah.
I've been a big advocate for women in ministry, equality for women. I mean, that's been a real hallmark of my life, because I'm surrounded by strong women, and so when I get around people that don't feel similarly, I have a really hard time imagining that. But even as an advocate, even as somebody who thinks very, very highly of women, and I'm always surprised at how different the female experiences is than the male. Like most men, in my experience, guy friends, parishioners, coaching clients, most men do not have the I'm not enough feeling. And so for so many women, for so many high capacity, strong, educated, capable women, they still feel like I'm not enough.
I don't know if well, maybe you're lucky enough to not have met like men that don't feel like they're good enough. But even like my father, and the conversations that we have, where I feel like my trauma and where I don't feel like I'm good enough has come from, has been like maybe it's not fair to put it all on my dad, but I put it like all on my dad, where he was adopted. His mom was like really young, but he was adopted like kind of like within the family, like the best friend of
somebody that was in
like
the situation.
The best friend of his grandmother, who happened to be married to like some type of third cousin. So with that being said, he's in the same family, but then also in the same small town. So he knows exactly who his biological parents are. He sees them with other siblings, or make a family with someone else, and even him being like spoiled out of the wazoo by his adopted mother still didn't give him feelings of being enough. And so he, as attractive or whatever he could have been on the outside, he still doesn't have these feelings of being enough. And it came off on me. So like I remember there was a conversation about how like I don't have a recognition of being told often that I was attractive by my father, that I'm like I was a pretty girl, or I was at this, or I was at that. So the first time guys started telling me that I was pretty, it was a wrap. I was cracked right open, like I was like turned out. You know what I mean? And then me having this conversation with him, he was like, well, to be quite honest, I didn't hear enough either. And so I think that men go through inadequacies also. It just manifests itself different because women are objectified differently. And so whereas if I don't feel pretty enough or inadequate enough, then I subject myself. I get on stage. I am now good enough because I'm stripping, and it can be quantified in dollars. As opposed to, women are cheap. We're not paying men to strip for us. Not like that. You're getting $5. You're not getting $1. But it might be quantified. It might be quantified differently. And then I think that because my father's experience of inadequacy when he met my mother and not being able to treat my mother well as she deserved to be treated well, and me subsequently not being treated well either. Based off the feelings that he had towards my mother, I think that's my way of saying no, men go through and the trauma reverberates through the generations in that way.
Now that's how you first got started in all this was you started going with a group of gals from church to local strip clubs, building relationships with the dancers, and just trying to bless them, right?
Right.
What was that whole journey like?
Yeah. So you want the whole story?
Sure.
Yeah, so
this is what I'm doing today. So.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
This is what I have time for this.
So for me, I was working at student development at Spring Arbor and taking student leaders to Las Vegas.
Which is a Christian university.
Down
here in Michigan, yep.
Taking student leaders to Las Vegas over spring break to do missions work. And we worked with a bunch of different organizations while we were out there. One of which was an organization that worked with women who were caught in the life, working in the life. And so that was my exposure to it. A gal that I met out in Vegas said to me one time, after about 3 or 4 years of these trips, you don't have to come to Las Vegas to do this ministry because you have it in your backyard. Yeah. And my response to that was, no, I live in Jackson, Michigan. We don't have that here. And so fast forward 3 years later, still going out to Las Vegas every single year. And she would say to me every single year, what are you doing for this in your home? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm working on that. We're going to do something, but I don't know what it is. So then I started sharing with my small group friends and some of my real good girlfriends that I really have this heart to do something, but I don't know what it would be. And so it took me about 3 years to get up the courage to come to Dave and say, Dave, I want to do something. And Dave said the most brilliant thing to me. He's like, why do you have to have it all figured out? Just get messy. Just go, figure it out as you go, adjust if it doesn't work, and keep going. So that was in October. And then in December, that very same year, I still hadn't done anything because I'm a chicken. And we were sitting in church at West Winds, and Dave is preaching, and it's the Sunday before Christmas. And he tells a story about being at that sci-fi convention in Chicago with a buddy of yours.
That's right.
And your friend said to you, you went into the Expo Center or something, and your friend said to you, we are the only light in a very dark place. Yeah. And it was when you said that, it was like God grabbing me and saying, what are you doing? Because you have the light and you are sitting in a pew, sitting in a chair, doing nothing. So that Sunday on our way home, I had my husband call Potter's, which is a strip club here in Jackson.
You and your husband, hey, honey, I need you to call
I said, hey, I need you to call Potter's. And he called and he said, hey, my wife wants to bring in gifts on Christmas Eve to your dancers. Can she do that? And they said, sure, why not? And they didn't care. They were wide open for us to come. Yeah. So I grabbed my friends and we put together gift bags. And that Christmas Eve, we went into the club and handed out gifts. And we just told the women, we're just here. We're just here to love on you, let you know that we see you, we value you, we're here for you. There was no agenda whatsoever except for to meet them where they were. And that kind of launched, we call it Hearts for Jackson. And then we would go in every major holiday and at least once a month, just go in and take in gifts and just love on the women. So that was my first exposure to.
I love that. I love that you women. Just went. You weren't trying to fix them. You weren't trying to save them. You're just trying to bless them. Just trying to love them. And it seemed to hear you tell. It seemed so easy. You called. You asked the manager or whoever, and they said yes. What's funny about all that is probably in the last 6 months to a year before you went in Jackson to the local strip clubs to bring gifts, I'd had probably a handful of men from West Winds, not regular people in our church, but people who would attend from time to time and then call me up and say, hey, I think I have a heart for strippers. I want to start a stripper ministry. And I would be like, no, absolutely not. You're so full of shit. Like, you cannot do that. No. You just want to go look at strippers and like, you know, put a Bible verse on it or something, you pervert, you know? And so I was it was so nice from my vantage point as a pastor to sit there and go, oh, yeah, right. That's how the ministry is supposed to look. There's no shadow to it. It's just love. There's no control. There's no manipulation. There's no weaseliness. It's just love and blessing. Right. And I love that.
One of my favorite memories of those times when we would go into the clubs is this one night we were at, it wasn't Potter's, it was a different club, and we're sitting at the bar with a stripper, and she was waiting for her turn to dance, and we're just sitting there with her, and she says, you know, I have a 2-year-old. Is it like time to do like potty training? Like, I don't know how to do that. And so we're like sitting at the bar talking about parenting, you know, and it's like, isn't that exactly what Jesus would do? Like, let me meet you where you're at and give you what you need. Yeah. Right. And it's like, I never in a million years would picture myself doing that, but it's like, hey, if we can talk about parenting right here, then let's talk about parenting, you know, like it was just one of those things. It's like, this is why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's super cool. Yeah. Did you start to say something?
No, I'm just like processing all of this because like, so I danced in Atlanta from 20 to 25, which is not like a big deal. Dancing in Atlanta is like working at Walmart. It's a strip club on every corner. Yep. And I came up in the era of like twerking music and stuff like that. So like from high school and all the music videos, it's like basically just women in bikinis dancing, talking about tip drill, you know, it's just all kind of things. So if I were to mention that I dance and it's like, but in Atlanta, oh, okay, we get it, because that's what you go to Atlanta to do. You go to the strip club. Doesn't close 3 a.m. Then there's an after party and everything like that. So I'm just like processing the things, like listening to you, Dave, saying how like the miraculous move of Jesus, and listening to you saying, well, it takes about 7 times, where Jesus is truly miraculous, because it didn't take me 7 times to get out of the lifestyle. It just took me a praying mom, and it probably took her 7 months praying out. Yeah. But once like she prayed me out, so I was dancing for a while. I danced for 5 years. My brother moved down to Atlanta, and he knew I was dancing because he would come hang out at the club or something like that, or he'd see my clothes. And he told my father, but my father never told me that. He knew. I kind of had an idea, but he never mentioned it, didn't do anything about it. Later on, my stepmother said, we were just happy you're making your own money. Mom finds out from a vision from the Lord. Calls me immediately, like crying about it. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you to make you feel better about this. This is what I do. Yeah. Make your peace. But that was like September of 2009, the day before my birthday by December 2010, I'm like in her house. So she got her praying hands got me all the way out of it. And, you know, I've never looked back. Have I thought about it? Heck yeah, because I'd be broke sometimes. And it'd be like, Lord, I made way more money. Come on now. Yeah. Right. You're going to have to help me out if I'm serving you. But so I'm thinking about how it didn't take me 7 times. It is a miraculous move of God that I was just, boop, out of it, in and out. And now I've been out of it longer than I was ever in it.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, you know, God is faithful in that. So that's why I'm just listening to you guys talk back and forth and process it. There was a time when I was dancing and some ladies, they brought in like $1 and a business card, and it was like, honey, you're gonna have to at least give me enough to pay my rent this month to get
$1. And what was $1 like?
$1 in a scripture, like they like put $1 in the scripture, like in my garter. I guess that was their ministry.
To give you $1.
But I'm saying,
that's
you're gonna have to give me like, can you pay my rent? Then you can get my attention right now. I can't do nothing with this $1, but if you want to drop a smooth like $7.50 right now, you have my attention. If you could pay me enough to not have to work tonight, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So, and I'm just processing like all of this, like this entire conversation, how it is a truly like blessed of the Lord that like I'm so far removed from it that no one would ever know, no one will ever guess, or And like, I just totally don't look like what I've been through.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that you speak about it
Yeah.
openly. I mean, I love that. I love that you don't hide it or feel any shame about it. You're able to talk openly about what God's done in your life, which is cool.
Like, God is faithful. You know, his gifts and callings are without repentance. So when I talk about like being a performance artist, sometimes when I'm down on myself, like, oh, okay, well, I'm working at a homeless shelter. I'm making, you know, I'm making my living. I'm doing good work. But this isn't what I feel like called to do. Am I ever really going to walk in the gift in what I feel I'm supposed to do? And the Lord will bring back to my memory, you were good at stripping. Like, I mean, like as a performance art, like I was really good at music and performing, dancing and this, that, and the other. And I was like fantastic. Like I was good at that. I was good at doing what I'm supposed to do when I wasn't even doing it for the Lord. I was doing it in darkness. How much more when now that I have my heart towards the Lord, will he allow me to really work out those giftings and callings? So he'll bring back that to my mind, like when you weren't even trying to follow me, what I placed in you still made you a star. So I think about those things, like God is faithful.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, there's I think a really strong power in understanding God's movement to rewrite our stories and rewrite our narratives and to redeem us, to change our ending. You mentioned the weird experience I had in Chicago because we're talking about missiological innovation, different things to do. We had a group of people that were doing a live storytelling project. And it was called The Revelation of June Paul, and it was like it was a novel that I'd written, and I thought this whole dispensationalist end times stuff associated with You've Been Left Behind really concerns me as a theologian and as a pastor. I see a lot of bad fruit from it. I don't think it's biblically substantiated. So I thought, well, what would be an alternative, a fictional alternative to all the Left Behind nonsense? So I wrote one. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with it? Because not everybody reads, and I'm not I'm not as famous as these best-selling people. And so, what am I going to do with this story? I thought, well, what if I get up and tell it? So then I started going to local comic cons and comic conventions and sort of nerd fan clubs and performing it, and it went really well. People were really appreciative. I took film crews with me, and we did lots of fun stuff. It was super cool. I had great spiritual conversations. We raised a lot of money, and the money we used actually went to combat human trafficking. We were working with a friend of mine, Tom Davis, and we gave all our money, thousands of dollars, to his organization, which was all great. But we went to this Comic-Con in Chicago, and I performed on stage in front of probably 300-400 people, which was really cool. It was really fun for me. And then afterwards, we were just walking around the con, which I'd never been to one before this set of experiences. And there's all these girls in totally skimpy outfits, dressed up as anime characters or whatever. And so as a guy, you're like, this is fantastic. Good night. This is like absolute heaven. Like I can't look anywhere right now because there's just like, this is every fantasy come true, So you're really trying to walk around with blinders on, and you're sort of aware of your own sin and your own lust and your own problems. Well, as the night wore on, till, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., I'm with the camera crews and the guys from the church, and we're being good, we're minding our own business. But you start realizing, like, a lot of these girls are really young, like 14. Like once you sort of get past the costumes, then you're like, wait a minute, that's a kid. So then you're like disturbed. Now for me, I'm not fighting lust. Now I'm sick to my stomach. And then as once you get past midnight, you're like, wait a minute, not only are these guys so young, there's like nobody protecting them. There's no security. There's no adults. And then all these creepers start coming out of the woodwork. Men with cameras, overweight old men with cameras. And they're literally pulling young kids, 12, 13, little like 80-pound girls into dark alleys to take seductive pictures of them with no release forms, no agent, no representation, no legal coverage, and it was like a molester's paradise. And so the camera guys and I, we just started, like, every time we saw a photographer, we just like sat there and watched the photographer. We'd just sit there with our cell phones and take his picture until he would like let the kids go or whatever. We'd ask them, hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? And the kids are always like, no, this is cool. I totally want this. And you're like, well, okay. Like at this point, like I don't have the authority to call your parents or, get the hotel involved. But it was so revelatory for me as a male to realize what those sexual impulses, if left unchecked, devolve into. As you realize, like, the way guys are wired, and certainly the permissions guys give themselves, like, that's the deterioration, if left unchecked and unredeemed. And it was really a horrible experience. So when I was talking about being the only light in the darkness, I just remember I was with Sid and Mike, and the three of us just going like, this is so creepy. And you just felt like that was such a target rich environment for those guys, and no protection for those kids, which is really scary. Yeah. And it does lead me into one of the other things I wanted to talk about. I just think it's worth just asking ourselves, and by extension asking the church at large, like what we think women are worth. Because well-meaning Christian men, let's imagine a totally Pollyanna scenario. They grow up in a good church family. They go to youth group. They grow up through purity culture, for whatever that's worth, where the big emphasis is don't have sex before you're married. But they're surrounded by images that objectify and sexualize women. They're surrounded by stories that do that. And men are sexualized to a tremendous degree now. Maybe not equal, but certainly getting close to that. I mean, there's just the sexual energy in our culture is eros run amok. And then these good Christian boys marry good Christian girls, and there's no sexual maturity. There's no theology of dignity. There's no understanding of personhood. And I mean, I've been in Christian ministry for almost 30 years, and I can tell you again and again and again and again and again, even though almost nobody would acknowledge it, even though almost no one would cop to it, the great majority of men look to their wives as someone who's supposed to please them. Full stop.
And we as women feel like that's our obligation also. Yeah. I'm supposed to please my husband. If I don't, he has every right to leave and cheat or whatever. So,
right. Well, so I'm a dad, of course. My daughter. I think about my beautiful daughter Anna. She's 14, and as a dad, all I want, like 10,000%, all I want is I want my daughter to flourish. I want her to have interests and hobbies. I want her to be mentally stimulated so that she's always learning, that she's excited, she's engaged. I want her to get caught up into the flow state where she's absorbed in her tasks and she's flourishing and developing as a person so that she becomes the best possible version of herself for God's glory with God's help. And that's what I want for my daughter. I go, well, time out. Is that what I want for my wife? And yeah, it is. But I don't think I was capable of understanding that when we started dating at 19.
Yeah.
And so I just think this really, like, well, for me as a guy, I've never had the thing in the back of my mind that said, you got to please your wife. Like, that's why you're alive. I love her, so I want to please her. I mean, I want to be a faithful and loving husband. But I think for so many women that their umbrella psyche is, you better look after this man. And maybe that's just because the men have been putting it on them. But certainly women are worth more than that. Mm-hmm. You've got bigger aspirations than that, bigger dreams than that.
Yeah. I wonder if it's the, do I want that for my wife? Like that real, her to like shine on her own. Yeah. If it's that desire, or if it's what we talked about at the very beginning, like that rejection runs deep, or that inner feeling of I'm not enough. And so, like if I allow her to be all that she can be, does that diminish who I am?
Oh yeah.
And so it's
men
that
can be very threatened.
It's that little ebb and rub and flow there, ebb and flow of, I want you to flourish, but don't. I want to flourish too. I
want you to have a career as long as you don't make more money than me and you're still around to do dishes and laundry.
Right. So with your daughter, how do you raise her up in such a way that she has a self-image that's strong enough that says, hey, I'm enough on my own.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need you to be complete. Like, I'm enough. And like, we all know as people of faith, like, that only comes when we know who we are in Jesus, because he's the one who makes us enough. And without that, we're constantly trying to be enough. And so I need you to complete me.
Anna, if you're listening, you're enough. Don't let anybody just kick him in the nuts. Kick him in the nuts and run if he tells you different.
Yeah.
And also, does she see it? Like, from the outside looking in, we all see Carmel, and we know that she's like this amazing warrior woman.
My wife,
like,
for those of you who don't know,
she's amazing. She's fantastic. Like, just from the outside looking in. So I could only imagine, like, her being her daughter, and like, does she see it in her mom as her being the superwoman that she is, and seeing that, oh, my mom goes after this, my mom goes after this, my mom goes after this. Because me seeing it in my own mom is the thing that keeps me motivated. Like, I'm very encouraged by the fact that I could have been born out of any woman, depending on how my dad was, how my dad was planting seeds. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
that's amazing.
But the Lord saw fit that I had, my mom's an immigrant. She came over from Panama. She tells me there was a time when my father told her, just like, go back, your English isn't good enough, or this and this. And she like made it like so far without even then having a degree, and then went back to school, went to college the same year I started, and I didn't finish, but she went straight through 4 years, then made like more money. Like, my mom constantly has reinvented herself and just glowed up. Even so, like, to this point, it's still like, ugh. So it's important that you see it. And so I think it's great that you're also like, you're pouring into Anna also, but she can visually
she's got a model. She's got a role model.
Whereas if I only had to see it on my father's side, I wouldn't see it.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't see it at all.
Yeah, one thing for somebody to talk about it, another thing for you to have healthy role models. And well, that's been a big thing for me in representation at the church where I pastor, is that, you know, once upon a time there weren't allowed to be women pastors or women on the platform leading at the church where I work, and that was the first, like, in my job interview, I told them this has to change. Like, this is the first fight I'm picking. It took us 4 years of weekly debates about the scripture, for myself and a few others arguing for the full inclusion of women in ministry. But then once the barriers are gone, you still got to get women up on stage.
Yeah.
And you still got to get women up there preaching. You got to get women up there prophesying. You got women up there teaching. You have to get women up there leading music. You have to get women up there so that our young girls sit there and go, like, there's no failure of imagination. You know, they see it. And both of you have done that at Westwinds. Both of you have been up. You've been part of my plan. As you've been part of God's plan, and part of your own flourishing. Yeah.
So when we lived here in Jackson, we love Westwinds. Like, we've been gone for 5 years, but if people say, "What's your home church?" we say Westwinds. Like, this is our home.
Yeah.
We love it, and so we struggled in Vegas finding a church that is even remotely like Westwinds, but we've landed at a church that one of their philosophies is that when people come in, they should see someone just like them on the stage.
Yeah.
And so like, they're very intentional about that same thing. And so you're absolutely right. Like, we can say like, oh yeah, women have a place in ministry, but if we don't put them into ministry positions, no one sees that.
Right.
And then like, the words don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I love that you said, you know, like, for Anna, she not only hears it, she's got this strong role model in front of her in Carmel, and like, that's beautiful, because that role model's invaluable.
Well, and that's why it's so cool for people who are either still dancing or who are transitioning out of something perhaps predatory to see people like yourself, Moni, is because they go, okay, here's somebody who's been out for a long time, and of course a very big difference between being trafficked and being a dancer, but still arguably part of the same spectrum or same continuum.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, am I allowing another person to exploit myself, or am I exploiting myself? Which I know at that time in my life, like, we're not so far removed from the other person, because it could have taken like one good conversation with one person before I would have had like my own pimp, and I would have been here for it, because it's like, oh, you're gonna manage everything for me? Great. Right. All I gotta do is wake up and come to work. Fantastic. You're gonna do all the work for me, and it would have been nothing, and it would have satiated my need to feel valued, to have someone else in my life. Because even though we talk about these relationships, like, how could you go back to it? And it's like, because nobody else was there. Nobody else was there when you're going through that period of time. And that's the good thing of, like, when you get isolated from your family, or, it's a really important to not like push your kids away, or when your kids are trying to flee, that you go after them.
Yeah.
You go after them. Like, my mom pursued me. Yeah. Whereas, and it's so interesting that I know the difference. Like, I have a contrast between my mother and my father. Yeah. Until really in the older I get, like, I'm 35 now, and so knowing I'm 35 and knowing how old my father was at the time is just like the comparison in like common sense or heart, just like, how could you not like run after your daughter? Where my mom, she did like run after me. So that's like the difference. But I know I used to be at my little office job, running around the building when the office was closed, like when nobody else would be in. Like, I'd run from the front to the back because nobody knew. Because there would be times where I'm like, man, I'm tired of dancing, but I don't know how to transition out of this. Yeah, sure. I don't know how to get a day job. I don't know, like, what do I even put on a resume? I don't know how to get hired. Right. And then just God just setting everything up to where it just kind of like fell in my lap and everything like that. It was like only God could like have me out of this. But I know for sure that I could have just as easily had a pimp. I danced with girls that did have pimps and would mark them with tattoos and stuff like that. And I remember I had a manager we worked for one time, and they called themselves rescuing her, but she ended up going back and whatnot because you couldn't be a prostitute in the club. But now that I'm thinking about it, our security and our managers were pimps.
We see that a lot. Yeah.
Were the guys who work in the clubs like moonlight or daylight or whatever?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Or just if you're on shift and they whisper in your ear, hey, go talk to that guy or this and this, and maybe they'll turn their head in the VIP room or something like that. I remember I was roofied one time and left face down in my own vomit, and like woke up in the hospital and there was like no traces, so they just called it alcohol poisoning. But the our stage mom, our house mom, that's what it used to be called, so the woman that pretty much like kind of manages the girls and stuff, she took my money. She stole all my money and left me face down in my own vomit.
Like went through your purse or whatever?
Like I'm face down in my own vomit in my dancing outfit. So probably like a bikini, like a thong or whatever, where the money like is on my garter, on my thigh. And I wake up in the hospital with like nothing. And like whatever clothes, I go back to the club and the stuff is in my locker. My money's not there. No one kept it. So she left me to die and like in my vomit, like face down in my vomit. I could have drowned in my own vomit. They said it took 4 grown men to carry like my lifeless body to the ambulance. Like, and so, just the industry in and of itself, if it makes money, it doesn't matter. And we could yes, we should say, oh, poor women. I'm not saying that we shouldn't say, oh, poor women, but not remove ourselves to how we might be getting pimped and exploited in our own industries. Because it's kind of like the same thing, how like we as Americans are overworked and underpaid, and we're just supposed to work more hours, and we're just supposed to do overtime, and we're supposed to do more and more and more to pay for these things. We're still exploited. And if we were to take that into account, then maybe it would have us to have more empathy on how we can really help people and remove them out of their situation, because we would understand what it would take for us to be removed out of our situation.
Sure. We have a sense of what health is like. And this, a lot of times people will ask the question about theology. Is theology a waste of time? Is it just an academic pursuit? Shouldn't we just pray? Why do we have to study? And it's exactly that. I go, the deep study of Scripture gives us an understanding of what life is supposed to be like. It's supposed to be like shalom. We're supposed to have peace and wholeness. There's supposed to be rest. And we're supposed to find joy in our work, not hardship. We're not supposed to be exploited. We're not supposed to prostitute ourselves, either for Christian ministry or for dancing in a club. We're supposed to have a sense of wholeness, a sense of family identity, but still some differentiation. It's great that I belong to a great family, but I better be great as Dave all alone. That's the same for men and for women. We better be connected and tethered to God in a meaningful way, both with our community and independent of our community, because sometimes the community goes screwy too. So, I mean, when you talk about us getting free of some of the really bad habits we have, I go, it's the Bible. It's the story of the Bible. It's the story of Christian theology that helps us understand not only that things are screwed up and when they need to be different, but what kind of different they should be, and gives us a vision of what health and wellness looks like as God's people and God's children. So,
so it's like the same idea of where, we really want to liberate women from sex trafficking and this, that, and the other, but we have no concern about how teenagers or just low income families are being exploited by like fast food restaurants, how we really expect these people to put in hours and be essential workers for like no money, for like there's no livable wage for this. And we have the audacity to throw French fries in their face or talk to them any kind of way because we see them as unskilled workers, and they're being exploited by that industry.
I remember you saying something about that earlier on Instagram, being fired up about McDonald's drive-thru employees being essential workers, which was a thing I really hadn't considered. Tell me, because I don't know, I confess total ignorance about this, but it's my understanding that the United States government just opened up the first anti-human trafficking task force. Is that correct?
We have like state level task force or county level, but yeah, the president is really going after trafficking, so they're doing like a national task force.
Okay, so a lot of people don't like Donald Trump, and perhaps for good reason, but that seems like a massive step forward.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I mean,
even if like I'm not sure like how the nitty gritty of all that's going to work out, but even the fact that just the awareness is being raised even one more time, one more level of awareness, and that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to go back to something that Simone said that I think is so good. You had said like you ran, through your office building, and you like, I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't know what to do. And that I love that, because that's really like with what I do at Refuge, that's where we came in, is because like you can't just say, oh, you should stop doing that. Like, I mean, they don't. Like if we're not going to give people tools and the resources to be able to change their life,
are they starve now?
What are they going to do? Right?
I established a very decent life.
Right.
Dancing.
And so I love that, because like that's exactly our philosophy too, is like, it's not rescue's so important. Getting the word out is so important, but you've also got to have the system in place to help women be able to, because I'm sure like when you were running back and forth, if somebody would have said, here's a path, you could walk down this path and you can get out and you can do these things and we're going to help you do that. Like you might have said, sweet, I'll go do it. Right. Because you had that's
a whole lot better than stop.
Right.
Do this instead. It would be better.
That's not helpful.
Simone, you said, you wish your dad had pursued you. So that there's a takeaway, dads. If your daughter or son goes off the rails, keep chasing them. You also said that you didn't hear from your dad that you were beautiful, which I think is a good thing for dads, just to speak positive, not only positively to their daughters or about their daughters and their kids, about their physical features, but also their deep interior worth. So there's some takeaways there. And I also think it may be important for us all to acknowledge that our identity is going to be rooted in Jesus and in the scriptures, like even in the men as well as women. I mean, the other day, a good friend of mine, he's a pastor in town, was texting me, and she was saying, just how's things going? I'm like, man, I feel like garbage. Every time I focus on the good work I get to do, I feel fantastic. If I focus on myself, I feel like trash. What I meant was, when I focus on my circumstances, then I go, this can be really discouraging during COVID. There's a lot of extra pressures, and it's really a tough road to hoe. She misunderstood me and thought I was talking about my own self-esteem. So she says, what has compromised your beloved son identity? Which I just thought, what a healthy response to her. Like she's going, look, if you feel crap about yourself, the problem is not you. The problem is what you're thinking about you. Because in God's eyes, you are always a beloved son. You're always a beloved daughter. So, I mean, and I thought, oh, what a great reminder. That's not actually the reminder I needed at the moment, but I think maybe that's a kind of a reminder we always need.
Yeah.
But what else should families be thinking about in order to protect their children? Because for me, I'm certainly not letting my daughter go out after midnight to a Comic-Con in Chicago anytime soon.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No, but even I was locked down and kept in the house either. Also, so it wasn't like no one was letting me do that. But time I got an inch.
Then
So you might not
for it.
let me out of midnight, but if you let me out at noon, I'm doing after midnight things. So
Yeah.
it's I think that it's good to have, like, that you said you're giving her, like, healthy outlets and things like that. So when I was here in Michigan, so I moved with my dad at 14. There was a lot of contention between my mother and my stepfather when I was 14. But I was a part of a theater group, and I was doing theater, and I really loved theater. Then my mom, like, forced me to join the choir at church, and that was very upsetting for me because I cannot sing. So it was like, why are you doing this to me? And at the time, we weren't like, we were not following, I wouldn't say we weren't following Jesus. We were Christian in name because we went to church, but we didn't live it at home. Like, I wasn't taught how to pray. I wasn't taught to depend on the Lord and Jesus for everything. Like, Christianity was more of a punishment. Like, go read the scripture, like those type of
Sit here and
things.
read your Bible.
So no, like, so like she didn't even have a legitimate reason to have me missing rehearsal in my, theater group to be at this choir. Like, no, it wasn't worth it. And we weren't active worshipers at home either. So, when I moved to Georgia though, there was no investment in me. There was nothing for me to do. And then finally, like, junior year of high school. Junior year of high school, I joined the soccer team because that's the only thing that I could afford because I paid for everything. So, like, I worked on the weekends and everything like that. And so I didn't have the $500 to join drill team where I could dance, but I had the $100 to join the soccer team. And they didn't even come to a game. I would have to find, like, my own way back at home from, like, practice and everything like that. I think my parents came to, like, one game out of the 2 years that I played. And so it's just not only giving people the outlet that they need to explore things that they may be good at, but then to support them in that also and really give them praise in that and make them feel like the things that they do are worth it. Yeah. And worth investing in. And so you just have to invest in your kids. They're your little yous, you know what I mean? So
I think a lot of people it's not so much that they don't want to. A lot of people maybe just don't even understand that they need to or have to, or it's something they should do. I mean, nobody teaches you how to be a parent until you're in it and you're screwing it up, or you feel like you're screwing it up, and then all of a sudden everybody tells you you're doing it wrong, or maybe you start soliciting advice. But the truth is, there's all of us have this responsibility to raise our children better than how we were raised. Right. Even if you were raised well. I mean, I had great parents, but no parents are perfect. So I stand on the foundation that my mom and dad gave me in hopes that Jake and Anna will stand on the foundation that Carmel and I have given them, and that my grandkids are way less screwed up than I am.
Yeah. I think it's also, like, you can't be afraid to have the conversations that you need to have. And, like, as a parent, you've got to know that your kids know way more about this than you do. So have them be your teacher and enter into that conversation. Because, I mean, they are living this every day. They're walking it out at school. Sure. They're seeing everything, and we think, like, oh, they're protected from that. Well, no, they're not, because they're alive. So, like, you have to be having the conversations. And
those things are happening at a pace that even the best and well-intentioned, most deliberate parents cannot keep up with.
Right. I
mean, so how do kids get started in prostitution? Like, how do they get hooked?
Right.
What are the things to really watch out for?
So we see a lot of, like, images on social media or whatever of, like, women in bondage or women in chains, but that's not, I mean, that does happen. Like, I don't want to say that does not happen.
What do you mean? Wait, what kind of images? Like really dramatic?
Well,
like
you see, like, human trafficking images, and it's like a woman behind bars or, like, in handcuffs or
like
whatever.
In a shipping container or something. Okay.
And that does happen. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but most kids who get involved, they're, like, trafficked by a family member. So it's like a relationship that is known. So, I mean, they can get sucked in so many ways.
So trafficking isn't like sold? Traffic, is it like...
Yeah, by a family member. I mean, and it might be even as simple, and I don't want to say simple, it might be at like a cousin says, you know, to a younger cousin, like, oh, you're going to have sex with my friend and he's going to give me some money. I'll give you some money. Like, it might be simple like that. But I mean, most kids who are put into trafficking are through a family member or a family association. Like, that's the draw. So how do we stop it? Like, we have to be having conversations with our kids. We have to be educating them. Like, look out for this.
Yeah,
look
like
out
stay
for
away
this.
from creepy uncle so-and-so.
Right? I mean, that's super important.
Oh, my mom was big on that. Do not sit on his lap.
Right. I mean,
Don't
you know,
sit on
but
his
like
lap.
paying attention to those things because it is just a dark world that we live in and we have to pay attention. Yeah. So how does
I don't know that I was entirely prepared emotionally for that to be the first thing you said. And
Yeah.
now
So then thinking about like, how does it happen? Like we talked about, like when you grow up not hearing that you're valued, not hearing that you're loved, not being shown that love, I mean, you start to look for that anywhere you can get it. And so you become very, very vulnerable to the creepy uncle who pays attention to you, or to the cousin who says, hey, my friend is attracted to you. That's attractive when you feel unattractive. And so like they just prey on that vulnerability. And so as a parent, like, how do we fill that void with the truth as opposed to allowing a stranger to fill that void? I'm going to fill that void as your parent, you know? Yeah.
Oh, that's gross. That's gross. Yeah. We got lots of work to do. Jeez. Jeez.
One of my friends told me a story that just happened to her cousin. She got trafficked through Instagram. Like, the guy got kind of talked her into some pictures and sending the pictures and whatnot, and then held the pictures hostage against her, and then said, I know your location. If you don't do this, I'm going to come like kill you and your brother, or I'm going to come kill you, or something like that. And so she was like, no, like, my brother's here. So he exploited her by having her exploit her brother and videotape it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So now the little girl can't even be around her own sibling because of the threat against her life. If you don't do this, we're going to kill him.
There's a lot of threat in prostitution. A lot.
So if you're being threatened like that, if someone's blackmailing you, is that the right? What's the right way to get out from under that?
Die. Just go ahead and die. No, I'm joking.
No.
I'm sorry.
That went dark really fast. We were already in a dark place, you know.
But no, sometimes I don't know. That's how my mind goes. Like, heaven isn't a bad thing. I can die. Like, there's no fear in death. We teach as Christians, like, don't fear death. God has, like Jesus overcome the grave. Don't fear death. I know you probably can't teach your children that, like,
but
don't fear
you're
death.
Gonna fear your brother's death. Even if you're not afraid to die, I'm going to be afraid if somebody threatens my. Well, actually, if you're stupid enough to threaten either Jeff or Dwayne, then God help you because you're screwed. But
So I mean, but part of that is like let's just use Anna as an example, even though this isn't happening to Anna. But like, somebody comes to her and makes that threat. If she doesn't feel like she can go to her dad, you know, like if she has this foundation with you that says, no, my dad's got my back, you know, like somebody could make that threat at her all day long and she's not going to bite, you know, because my dad's got my back.
I got your back, baby.
Right. So, I mean, like, that's the thing. But when that relationship with the parent is not there like that, and the threat comes in, I mean, they buy it. They believe it, you know?
But are the threats always empty? I mean, some of those threats have to be real, right?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say they're empty.
So what do you do if you think the threat is real and somebody goes, you know, hey, if you don't do whatever I want, I'm going to come and hurt your mom or your daughter, or I'm going to come and hurt somebody you care about. What is the way? I mean, do they go to the cops? Do they go to? I mean, how do you get out from under that threat?
Yeah, I think the only way you get out from under that threat is you have to tell somebody. Like, you have to call the bluff of the threat, and the threat might be real, but then we have to trust that our system is going to step up and do the right thing. So, I mean,
and is the system trustworthy?
Sometimes, not
I don't trust the
always.
system.
I mean, like the women that we work with don't trust the system at all because they've been burned by the system. So, I mean,
so so then is it a lesser of two evils? Like I go, if somebody's got dirt on me, well, I'll use myself as an example because then that doesn't make anybody feel too uncomfortable. But let's say, all right, Dave, I want you to do bad things, or else I'm going to burn down the chapter house, and I'm going to wait till it's full of people, and so that
that is
awful,
more scary,
right? Mm-hmm. So then I go, well, shoot, I'm going to go to the cops, but the cops aren't going to be able to find this person. There's no evidence this person made the threat. As soon as I go to the cops, they're going to know I'm going to go to the cops, so they're going to say, Dave, if you go to the cops, I'm going to elevate the timeline or escalate the timeline. Mm-hmm. But I'm still better off to go to the cops, right? I go to the cops and say, hey, man, this is the guy's phone number. This is how he contacted me. This is what he's doing. And they'll go, well, all right, well, we'll look into it. So they're not really going to do much, but still, I've called their bluff and maybe I've created distance. I mean, is that better? Well, you don't know?
I mean, I think it's better, but I don't really know. But I mean, I feel like you have to do something.
Yeah.
So that's something.
Better to take action than not.
Than not to sit on it or to cave and do what they're asking you to do. Because that's never going to end. Like that's
right.
just
as soon as you give in once,
right? That's never
the rest
ending.
Of your life.
Yeah. And the threat against family is very real in the trafficking world. Like that's what holds most people is a threat against family. I have a gal that I'm actually talking about tomorrow in the message who her trafficker from 3 years ago just made a threat against her family 3 years later. And that's kind of rare that much later it happens. But I mean, it's just a reminder like, no, this is a really evil world that we're walking in.
Dark. Yeah.
And
and it pushes you to a dark place because the first thing I thought about was like, well, it looks like I got to take you out, huh?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. And now you're thinking of a solution.
I guess if I cut off your hands, you can't hurt my family.
Like now I'm in jail. Great.
Yeah.
But at least you can't hurt anybody.
All right, so
but it all just like re-emphasizes how important as a parent, that was how that started. Like, what do you do for your kids? Like that line of communication has to be open. Like it has to be open.
So so now we talked a little bit about dads, parents chase after your kids if they go south. Parents affirm your kids, their physical and mental, emotional, spiritual worth.
And feel like they can talk to you about anything. Like now as an adult, I can talk to my mom about anything. But I remember being so scared of my mom of getting in trouble because any little thing, like I remember when I'd be out in public and strangers would be like, oh, you're so pretty. I bet you have a lot of boyfriends. You better not have a boyfriend. It's like, I feel like I'm in trouble and I didn't even do anything. Right. And now I would never talk to my mom about anything. And it isolated me from her, sent me with my dad where it was. So it's like, make sure you feel like, can we talk about anything? Like really make it so like, so your kids can come to you.
I mean, it even kind of highlights how important like people are in the church, right? Because you may not be a parent, but there's a lot of kids in your church. And maybe those kids don't have that kind of relationship with their parent, but maybe they can have it with you. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're that person that can have that conversation.
And if you're listening and you don't feel like you have anybody to go to, then you should find somebody. You should start developing those healthy relationships insofar as you're capable of doing that, especially within the church, because better to have something than nothing. Mm-hmm. Now, what about, so we talked a little bit about family stuff, a little bit about personal responsibility, but there's a lot of Christians who are concerned about the issue of human trafficking. And over the last 10 years, I don't want to say it's become the pet cause or the cause celebré, but there's certainly a lot of new awareness about human trafficking and sort of all the widespread tendrils of it. What can people do to make a difference?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of organizations out there that are frontline, that are working in this field. And so, I mean, you can volunteer with them. That's something you can do. You can financially support them. Most of the organizations are faith-based organizations, so their funding is very limited. So it's not like they have free access to all the money that's out there. They're relying on the local church. They're relying on individual people to come along and sponsor and donate. And I mean, that's something that you can do. Something that we had to come like really face to face with at Refuge for Women is like in a perfect world, sex trafficking would end. And we would end sex trafficking, but like that's not going to happen. Right. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Not on this side of the river.
So our goal is like, Our vision is not that we end it, but our vision is that we equip women with the skills that they need so that they can get out, that they can be successful independently. So, I mean, get involved with organizations that are doing things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about, that's great. I'm slightly shifting gears, but only to cover additional topics, not to dismantle that. But what about social media? Because as a pastor, I just look at all the people and all the churches that I help, and I go, we're part of the problem. I don't mean the church is part of the problem. I just mean humans and the way we look at other humans is at the root of why the world's oldest profession is still flourishing. We commodify one another. We exploit one another. We transactionalize sex all the time, not just for money. We transactionalize sex for belonging. We use sex as a transaction for pleasure, for forgetting. It's a coping mechanism. Certainly, there's got to be something. There's got to be something distinct within the church about our use of social media. I mean, the old nursery rhyme is "Be careful, little eyes, what you see." I mean, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, there's just so much nudity, even in platforms where nudity is banned. I mean, you really gotta, church, you gotta wake up and clean up what you're looking at.
Yeah.
What else? What else are the things that you think we can do that would make a difference internally?
Don't be afraid to have a conversation. I mean, like with me, going into the clubs, it took me 6 years to get the courage to do it. And that was just stupid. Like if you feel like the Lord is leading you in this path, like just go, and I love like if I would have met Simone, I would have been your friend, like I just have that heart to go and love people where they're at. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say don't let the response or the feedback discourage you either. Just because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about like just hard conversations that I've had in the last like couple of months, and they don't necessarily have to do with sex trafficking, but have to do with just like the racial injustice that's going on, and how people feel like, oh, now I want to talk to you about this, or now I want to have this conversation with you. And I'm like, I don't want to have this conversation with you. You go fix it. Like, you guys start, like, you're doing white supremacy. Don't talk to me about pray. Go pray with your racist grandma. Like, you go fix it. And even though that's like my very honest response, that doesn't mean that I want you to stop trying to work at it.
Yeah.
And so, if you came in the club and you attempted to be my friend, the first thing that crossed my mind was, did you pay enough to be my friend? And even if you were like, no, I'm not about to pay you enough to like be your friend or get you out of this lifestyle. But even that very coarse response doesn't mean to like not keep trying or not still like be making an effort. So even though if like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with you, knowing that having this conversation has my own human imperfections aligned with it, has my own biases, my own privilege, like, and the person that you're talking to kind of just like hits you with an abrupt, get a clue, like, doesn't mean that you still shouldn't educate yourself or really get there.
Yeah.
Because that's what it means, where it says, oh, love people where you are, but you already still have this preconceived notion of where I am. You know what I mean? You still have this idea that, well, you're the one being exploited, not me. And so still that type of we're in two different spaces is still something that could still, I don't want that to keep you from having the conversation, but when that gets called out in you also, that you still are able to be open enough to learn from it and then like move and grow in that and move past it. Because I think sometimes the response makes us shut down. Yeah. Like, I don't want to do it at all because I don't want to be reprimanded. I don't want to be called out.
Yeah, there's a kind of a condescending help.
That
I think it's just there's a huge learning curve, for anybody, and we're gonna screw it up sometimes, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try.
Yeah,
and we
we'll figure it out as we go along.
Yeah, trust God, and He'll fill in the cracks. You know what I mean? We're not going to be perfect at it. And like you told her, like, get messy, go ahead and get messy, but like don't give up. And then you just kind of learn more as you go.
Yeah, and that's true not just for this issue, but really for any issue. I mean, nobody. I mean, once upon a time, youth groups all over the world were running mission trips 2 to 3 times a year, and then we started realizing that a lot of our mission trips were doing more harm than good. We started referring to toxic charity. We started talking about the white savior complex, and started talking about the evils of colonialism and parochialism, and all those things are true. But now we have a bunch of people not going on mission trips anymore because they think they're bad. Like we should just recognize that we're not going to do it right, and be humble and make tweaks as we continue to go.
Right.
Because Jesus told us to go. He told us a bunch of other things too, but he never stopped telling us to go.
Yeah.
And we got to go to the clubs. We got to, if we're women,
Yeah.
we got to go to those who are hurting, go to those who are in need, and then be penitent and humble and know that we're going to screw it up. And that doesn't mean that we don't go anymore. It means we go in a different spirit. We go with contrition. We go to learn.
Yeah. That's just make me think of when we first started going into the clubs. Like we were trying to figure out like, when do you go? What's the best time? And our first thought was, oh, well, Friday nights should be really busy. We should go on a Friday night, right? And we quickly learned that's the worst time to go because like if I'm walking in the club and I'm interrupting your business, like you're not going to talk to me because I'm an obstacle now. I'm not a help. So like we would try to pick like the lowest trafficking, but like peopled, like they're the least number of customers in the room because we don't want to be interrupting anything. We want it, like we don't want to be in the way kind of thing. And so like, I mean, it is like, you just got to get messy and you got to learn and you got to step out and step back in and keep going. And,
well, we know the most creepiest stuff happens on day shift.
well, there you go.
Really?
Yeah. That's when you really get paid for the he always was the day shift versus the night shift girls. And we always knew like the day shift girls, they're a little something strange.
Well, thanks you guys for joining us. That was a funny note to go out on.
Yeah, right.
That's all right. It's not like I never had anything strange happen before, but well, I think for me the thing that always comes back more and more and more is because this world is so broken. We need to be ardent, passionate followers of Jesus, working together to heal the world because the world needs healing. And like you said, Robin, this issue and so many others are never going to get fixed in our lifetime. They're never going to get fixed on this side of eternity. So it's not the healthy that needed the doctor; it's the sick, and the world is sick. And God's called us to be the doctors of His church, moving forward, doing what we can to heal. So thanks everybody for joining us today on the Chapter House podcast, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, you guys.